for a storm to successful in 2 victories, both Friday and Saturday nights. A huge thank you to Cliff, Andrew, and Jaylene, the talented ice carvers from Activate Arts Alberta, who put on an extra layer and crafted a phenomenal display of frozen masterpieces. We're looking forward to warmer temperatures in the forecast and hope to see people out, our residents out, enjoying the Aquaterra Ice Slide and Green Path Skating Oval that are open to the public at the Montrose Cultural Centre, as well as the Green Path Croquet Curl and skating on the pond at Muskosipi Park. With the conclusion of the 2024 festival, we've already started planning for the 2025 event. And if anyone listening is interested in being part of the 2025 festival, reach out to sponsorship@cityofgp.com. Upcoming tickets that are on sale right now, the Alberta Winter Games opening ceremonies, along with day and weekend passes. They're now on sale through Bonnett's Energy Centre box office. And the 2025 PBR is now on sale. Bulls will be bucking September 27th and 28th of 2024. And with that, I can take any questions.
I don't see any questions popping up, so I will move on to the next item on the agenda, which is Telecommunication Tower, and that will be introduced by Chief Glavin.
Thank you, Chair Blackmore. So administration has received an application for a telecommunications tower in the Brochu Industrial Park that we are recommending be approved. And I will now turn it over to Development Officer Diane Tennant for the details.
Thank you, Madam Chair. PL 230411 is a request for a letter of attestation for a proposed telecom tower on the property at 12201 104th Avenue, and this is in the Brochu industrial area. It has been brought to my attention that in my report, I incorrectly referred to this tower as a monopole design in one location in the report. That is incorrect. To clarify, this proposed tower is a lattice style, and the images of the proposed tower in the report are all correct and do reflect what they are proposing. All of the properties surrounding this proposed tower are zoned general industrial, and it is over 1 kilometer from the proposed tower to the nearest residential zone property. The applicant has completed all of the required notification and advertising of this proposal with no responses received. Thank you. The only requirement of our land use bylaw that this application does not entirely meet is that we would prefer to see a monopole tower design, and this application is for a tri-pole lattice-style tower. However, the applicant advises that this style of tower gives them more flexibility for future co-location opportunities, and as this location is an industrial area, the visual impact is not as great of a concern. It is recommended that the InvestGP committee provide the requested letter of attestation for this tower proposal. And we do have a representative from the applicant standing by via Zoom. Hopefully he's still hanging with us if there are any questions. Thank you.
Ms. Tennant, that would be Anthony Novello?
Yes.
Okay. I don't see any questions popping up yet. So if there are no questions, would someone like to handle the business? Councillor Palat?
Thanks, Chair Blackmore. I just move that committee support this proposal for a telecommunications tower.
Thank you for that motion. I still don't see any hands popping up, so I will call a question. And that is in, maybe not in favor.
Councillor Platt in favor.
And that is carried. Moving on to 3.3, another telecommunication tower, and Chief Glavin, are you introducing that as well?
Thank you, Chair Blackmore. I will introduce that. So administration has undertaken a review of the land use bylaw regarding to cell towers and restrictions. Generally speaking, the findings of the review showed that Grande Prairie is more restrictive in the placement of towers when compared to a number of other Alberta municipalities. And as such, administration is not recommending any changes at this time. And I will now hand it over to Planner Zeal Patel for the presentation.
Thank you. I'm here to present on telecommunication towers. On October 30, 2023, Council directed administration to undertake a thorough review of the city's land use bylaw regarding cell towers and restrictions. I will start by giving an overview of the telecom towers and the process. Today, wireless technology is responsible for delivering many relied upon communication services. We use this technology in various ways. In order to provide wireless services, telecom infrastructure is required to meet the growing demand. Telecom towers are critical to Canada's economy and national security. Innovation, Science and Economic Development, a federal agency, approves the development and operation of these structures. ISED requires that local land use authority and the public be consulted for input regarding the proposed placement of the telecommunication structures. Planning and Development Department reviews each proposal based on structure, height, design, the potential for co-location, and compliance with the city's land use bylaw. Administration then presents all the requests to the Invest GP committee with the recommendation either in support or opposed to the applicant's request. Note that where the city does not support a proposal, it cannot prevent the applicant from ultimately gaining permission from ISED. ISED requires surrounding property owners to be mailed a notification package of the proposal. The city encourages telecom towers to co-locate, that is, locating and using the existing telecom infrastructure. And when proposing a new tower, the city encourages that they are located in industrial or commercial areas and not in the residential neighborhoods, primarily to preserve the aesthetics of the community. In our land use bylaw, the preferred setback from the residential areas is 6 times the tower height. Administration did a jurisdictional scan of other municipalities to review their approach to telecom tower regulations. And it is to be noted that the residential setback regulations for the city of Grande Prairie are quite strict compared to other municipalities. Regarding health and radio frequency exposure issues and limits for telecommunication antenna systems, these elements are regulated by Health Canada, specifically Safety Code 6. Health Canada's position is that there are no human health effects as long as the requirements are met. The City of Grande Prairie has neither the authority nor the medical research capacity to assess any submissions for telecom structures with respect to RF and health issues. Based on this information, administration recommends that Invest GP committee receive this report for information. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Patel. So I have Councillor Bressi in the line, and then Councillor Palat.
Great, thank you, Chair Blackmore. I'd love to know a little bit more about the notification period. How long from the time when we get notified that a tower's being applied for, and the time where we have to sign off on it as a committee, do we get?
Through the chair, there are 2 pieces for public notification. One is the requirements from ISED, and I believe off the top of my head, they notify all property owners within 3 times the tower height. So in instances where a proposed cell tower meets our requirements for 6 times the tower height, the city does no adjacent notification. We just leave it up to the applicant and the ISED process. They complete their entire public notification process as far as timelines from when they notify till they supply or they submit to us. I'm not exactly sure of the requirements. However, I get the impression that they've done that before we're moving forward with the application. So there's plenty of time for adjacents notified through the ISED process to be heard. The applicant needs to submit a report to us with all of those findings. So that's the one piece. And then the other piece is, as committee will see at the next committee meeting, is that when there are residential properties within 6 times the tower height, the city has notified adjacent property owners, and that's basically mirroring our variance process. Even though it's not a variance because it's not a development permit, we're just basically mirroring the process. And that is approximately a 2-week notification period, but in all reality, with respect to committee scheduling and whatnot, it can go up to 3 or 4 weeks. We never really close the door on submissions. So, yeah, depending on which piece you're talking about, there's ample time for response.
So just my observation, not going to make any motions about it, but just my observation, we often reputationally wear a lot of negative connotations from our notification process. So what happens is they open the letter and they say, hey, this application started months ago, but I'm only hearing about it now when I only have 2 weeks. And it's not really our fault that it started there and they didn't hear about it. We're actually going above and beyond. And so I just encourage us, if we can, legally without getting in trouble, to add some more detail to those letters about, hey, when the city found out about it, not when they started the consultation process, but when we actually found out about it. And also the residents that get those 3 to 6 things, they don't realize we're going above and beyond and talk to them. And they also often don't realize that we really don't get a say at the end of the day. We get a recommendation, but it's not our decision at the end of the day. And so I think by going above and beyond, we're actually making residents a lot more angry at us than we need to. And so just some observations I've got based on some of the phone calls I get from residents.
Did you want to respond, Joe?
I can respond to that through the chair. Thank you, and I'm aware of the situation you're referring to. We haven't had much practice with the process of notifying adjacents because most of our adjacent residential properties, that is, because of the applications we've seen to date, have met the 6 times the tower height requirement. We are aware of where there were some gray areas, and we'll tidy that up in the future.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. I'll go to Councillor Palat.
Thanks, Chair Blackmore. Just when I read through the report, and I just want to get some clarification, if I'm understanding correctly, if there's no, if an applicant come in and it was on MR of the city and it was deemed a good location, they did all their process, there's really no reason for us to say no in that scenario. Am I correct on that?
Through the chair. Yes, ultimately it would be council's decision if it met the 6 times the tower height and council was okay with the location on municipal reserve, then by all means it is ultimately a subjective opinion as to whether or not, for example, we'd want a cell tower in South Bear Creek Park, but it would likely meet the requirements of 6 times the tower height from residential properties. However, as a property owner, it's entirely within council's authority to just say you don't want it there.
Okay. Well, and I guess that there's a little bit of a concern for me. This almost reminds me of our bylaw review of digital signs, and that we didn't want the digital signs scattered all over the community. We kind of put them to specific zones. And I guess I appreciate we have teeth around residential, but there's nothing that stops us from letting 75 towers go up around Eastlink Center. You know, and that's something that I guess concerns me, is we don't have anything in here about public use facilities that have a certain concentration of people in them. So I'm asking, is that are we legally allowed? And I guess that's more of a question for me. Are we allowed to start adding more layers in that if it's around a public use facility, it has to have more span? Because right now we're only talking about residential setbacks. We're not putting anything in for public use, schools, Eastlink Center, for example. So would that be, are we allowed to make those changes if a council wanted to update this policy to say, hey, we actually want to stop having these so congested around some of those public serving facilities?
Through the chair, the primary angle you'd have on that is as a property owner. If it were a private property that happens to be near a public facility, then you'd have to lean more on your regulations. I can't think of an instance where there would be a public facility or a private property within a public facility that, or near a public facility that would meet the 6 times the tower height requirement. But it is possible that there'd be an opportunity to bolster the regulations to prevent that. I'm not entirely sure exactly how we'd do it, but yes, there are opportunities, but I think the primary one would be just assuming you're referring to the CKC applications as an example, the city's the property owner and you don't even really have to have a reason. You just say, no, you don't want it there. And the application's done.
Okay, so we could add more legislation to give us a little bit more teeth on that. My other concern, I guess, is if we're looking at MR, when I think about this is, do we want, and right now when I read this bylaw, there's really no teeth or ability for us to say no to a cell tower. So we could end up having a major concentration on a corridor where it's not very visually aesthetic to our community. I don't know how we would say no to that currently within this bylaw as well. So I'm just trying to look for, I want to be open for business, but I'm also concerned that the current bylaw, although it meets we're going above and beyond for residential. Other than that, I don't feel like we have any teeth in this of where these can go, and that, I'm just concerned about that moving forward. I'm really worried we're going to see a pattern of these just be congested in the same spots over and over again, which fine, it meets the intent, but I don't know if any of us are going to be happy if there's 15 cell towers around the Eastlink Center at some point.
Through the chair, there's a few points there to touch on. One would be clustering. I kind of view as a double-edged sword. On the one hand, I understand your point in that some people may not be too impressed with the idea that there's a cell tower on the CKC site. So I understand your intentions of maybe trying to have some policy that directs away from clustering. But on the other hand, when there's an ideal site and there's, it meets all the requirements, which those ones did, then you do want clustering, because let's imagine a bunch of cell towers in Richmond Industrial Park. It's kind of the least obtrusive, and so clustering is desirable in some cases, and I can understand how maybe there isn't. And again, I just go back to the point that as a property owner, you don't need regulatory teeth. You can just agree as a group that you don't want cell towers on the CKC site, and it's done. For other sites that we don't own, no matter how much teeth we have in our regulations, if we decide to submit a letter of support or non-support, the applicant can still proceed to ISED and get an approval. I'm not aware of any instances where that's happened with the city. Most of the time when an applicant comes to the city and says, oh, we're thinking about putting a cell tower, right adjacent to residential, we'll say, well, that's likely not going to get support, and they've gone away. However, they can proceed and ultimately get approval.
Okay, I got to give it some thought. I'd like to see us have a little bit more teeth while we're being open for industry, so they know that they have options, but not just everything's available to apply on. That's kind of a concern for me.
Councillor Thiessen.
Thank you very much, Chair Blackmore. I agree with some of the sentiments of Councillor Palat. Just to touch on a couple things here, I do have 2 questions. But in my time on City Council, we've had 3 cell phone towers that we've said no to, and we've never had the Rogers or other telecommunications company come back and force their hand. Largely it was protection over our top of bank in the River Valley. But when we said no, we actually had teeth, because it costs money for them to fill out the application, it costs some time to go there and to fight for it. And it's just easier for a telecommunications company to find a better location that's not going to get as much pushback. The other thing, we just had a telecommunications tower approval prior to this, and this is an example of what I think is the appropriate use being used for land, which is why I didn't speak out against it, because industrial, commercial, that's where it belongs, and that's where we want to put things. And like Mr. Johnson said, if we're going to cluster, we cluster. My question is, I have 2 questions. So my first question is, when we did our jurisdictional review of different municipalities across the province and how they approve cell phone towers, I appreciate that that residential was monitored there. But part of the question in the original motion was any other examples of cell phone towers on school field sites. Now, I don't see that addressed in the report anywhere, and I think Councillor Plott touched on it. My concern is we have one cell phone tower at Montrose, at the Comp. We now have two at the CKC. And we have lots of field space in elementary schools, junior highs, all throughout the neighborhood, which it's a public service use, so it kind of skirts the residential use. But my concern is it's going to perpetuate, and next thing you know, we're going to be approving these on all school fields because they have the space and it covers the distance and the max. And the more we say yes, the less opportunity we have to say no in any appeals. So my question again is, did we scan any other school sites and see if Edmonton, Calgary, Red Deer, or any of those jurisdictions are doing the same approvals that we just did?
Through the chair, so through the research of other municipalities across the province, it was identified that the main focus of having these regulations in the land use bylaw was having the residential development setbacks. There were few odd cases where school sites or public service sites were discouraged, but the main focus of having the regulations in the land use bylaw was having the residential development setbacks. But there were few cases identified where school sites were discouraged locations.
Okay. School sites were discouraged locations. Thank you for that. My second question is, I know that the original motion was amended to withhold like any health considerations. I appreciate that you put that in your report. Keeps with the intent of the original motion. So my question around that is, who is responsible for measuring and monitored the RFR levels at the base of the tower and surrounding areas? Is that the telecommunications company? Is that a third party, or is that the city of Grande Prairie?
Through the chair, so the telecom companies are supposed to take care of the requirements that are given by the Health Canada, and they are supposed to meet the requirements of the Safety Code 6. And Health Canada is the authority that would monitor the RF and any potential human health effects related to it. City of Grande Prairie does not have the capacity to assess any submission based on RF or health issues.
Do we have the opportunity to potentially get that information and see if it is being monitored, measured, and tracked?
Through the chair, I'm not sure.
Thank you.
I would suggest, though, that we could find out if we can get that information, that it would probably be available through Freedom of Information, if nothing else. Councillor O'Toole.
Thank you very much, because Councillor Plott and Councillor Thiessen had spoke before me. My questions that I had were answered, and thank you very much for the answers. But I just want to say one thing. 15 years ago, the technology was completely different than it is now. If you remember, or look at 108th Avenue and 92nd Street, that tower was there back in the 60s, still sitting there, and it still serves a function. But the towers that we need, and that served the entire city and actually outside the city. But you look at the towers now, if you do 5G, for instance, you need a number of towers, and they have to be close together. And after they're not close together, they lose the ability to do the 5G. So that's why you're going to see more towers in communities to get the technology, so we can have our ambulances and our police and whatever requires that kind of service in our community, including your own cell phone, so you can play games or do business on your computers. So that's all I got to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Toole. We'll go to Councillor O'Connor.
Thank you, Chair Blackmore. I'm just Googled last night. The Youth Advisory Committee had asked this question, and the range, 4G wavelengths have a range of 10 miles. 5G wavelengths have a range of 1,000 feet, not even 2% of 4G's range. So, and I'm not sure how accurate this is, but it says to ensure reliable 5G signal, there needs to be a lot of 5G cell towers and antennas everywhere, and we're talking every lamppost and every street light. So so living with the towers that are there, the only thing is from an aesthetic position. I think you mentioned yesterday, Joe, that there are some cities that disguise the tower looking like a tree or a monument of something. Do you want to comment on that?
Through the chair, I certainly can. There are some instances, and I've seen them personally, where the equipment is shrouded. Shrouded is the term that's used quite often, where a smaller tower is made to look like a large tree. Those were in environments where large trees were common. So when we've talked to providers about that here, they've said that it actually winds up looking quite goofy because it's all of a sudden just this really massive tree in an otherwise small tree landscape. However, with 5G towers being smaller than the average towers that we see nowadays, that may be a possibility. And then the other thing that I have also seen personally is where there's existing infrastructure. For example, a church had a bunch of equipment strapped near the top of it, and on lampposts for repeaters, I think is what they might be called or something. But certainly the technology is changing, and hopefully the trend is towards, although there will be more infrastructure, hopefully it will be less obvious to just a less obvious feature on the landscape.
I have seen a 300-foot palm tree, and they look ridiculous. Councillor Watt.
Thanks, Chair Blackmore. I know in the report it's asking us to accept this for information, and I'm struggling with that because I don't think that this, for me, meets the full intent. So I'm going to try to make a motion at committee here, and my motion is that we instruct administration to work on a consideration of what setbacks could look like around public use facilities and schools. And I'd like that to actually, it could come back to council, but realistically, I feel like it's at a committee level here. This is a pretty high level conversation that I'd actually prefer this go back to council. I can appreciate if this motion passes, it comes to committee. My hope that it would be a council discussion. I think there's a lot of members of the community that think we're not doing enough about this, and I don't like that it's just stuck to that committee level. I think this is a council conversation if we do choose to change the bylaw. But I'd like to see us try to, not saying we will change when administration comes back with some ideas, but I'd like to have a conversation about what it would look like if we actually started putting setbacks around public facilities with high utilizations and schools specifically. I love that we have something around residential, but I don't like, as Councillor Thiessen said, that's just going to be targets for these all over the place. And my fear is that if we don't put some parameters around that, it makes administration have a really hard time saying no to those. Then every time they come back to council, we're debating on individual towers. And I don't think that's the intent of the policy, but I don't like that we don't have any teeth, that these could just show up at school after school after school. So that's my motion, is that we have asked administration to bring back consideration on this bylaw for what potential setbacks could look like for public use facilities and schools.
So, Councillor Plott, did you want to include in your motion that this that the work you've asked them to do go straight to council, or do you want it to report back to this committee and then go to council?
I would look to our city manager on that. I'm fine with either, because I think if it's a high enough level conversation, I would hope that somebody on that committee at that time would actually refer it to council, not just at the committee level. But
Chair Blackmore, we would take committee's advice on that. We don't have any recommendation.
Councillor Bressie and then Councillor Thiessen.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I guess I'll ask a question first, just to make sure I know what I'm talking about. But when we're looking at a school such as Harry Balfour, Avondale, that are right in the middle of a residential area, am I correct in assuming that those would be treated as a residential area with setbacks from houses, etc., or would they be treated similar to Eastlink Centre Community Knowledge Campus?
through the chair, we would be viewing it as the regulation is 6 times the tower height from a residential property. We wouldn't be viewing the school as a residential property, even though the school carries the same land use districting sometimes as the it's from properties with houses on it. Gotcha. To take it a step further, another thing to keep in mind is that while I did state that the ultimate hammer is that we're property owners, as council may be aware, there are numerous examples where the school district actually owns the property. That's from the older model of municipal reserve. And the newer model is that the city maintains ownership. So it is entirely possible that the cell tower provider or cell provider could contact a school district, appropriately begin their own negotiations, and then our only angle would be the letter of attestation. However, just in thinking this through, in most cases with school sites, the 6 times the tower height would be a bit of an issue. However, again, with the 5G technology of shorter towers, then it does introduce the possibility that it is more feasible.
And just speak to the motion. I'm struggling to support this. And I guess for me, it's not specific enough feedback for me to say, hey, administration, come back and give us what setbacks could be considered. They could come back and say, hey, 0 setbacks considered, given if all they're looking at is from what does Health Canada say about this, or they could come back and say, hey, it should be a 2-kilometer setback if we're just looking at what's going to make every single parent happy and what aesthetics are going to look at. And I think that for us to ask administration to do more work, we need to give more direction around what are we actually trying to accomplish with that. And so I'm a little bit biased here because I don't have much patience with the conversation, period, because I just really don't think that they are unhealthy for people. But if we are going to give administration direction, I think we need more parameters around it than I see in this motion right now. I don't know what we're actually asking them to do here.
I'm going to go next to Councillor Thiessen, and then did you want to respond to that?
Thank you very much. I'd just really like to thank administration for putting this together. I know it can be a contentious issue. I know I'm not always the easiest person when talking about it. I have my line in the sand that I'm not willing to cross. But I wonder, I have a different opinion than Councillor Bressie in the fact that I think we haven't investigated enough. Now, I'm not asking administration to go and investigate all this. I think it's important that we make the consideration and the distinction that, kids in schools are housed there almost more than they're housed in their home, and that we should have some residential considerations for schools, especially around technologies that are ever evolving, as Councillor O'Connor stated earlier. 15 years ago it was only 2G, now we're at 5G, so the technology is evolving. I think it's a worthy discussion. Why I chimed in here, though, is I think to go directly to council might be a bit much. It might be something that might draw ire from the community, or at least opponents to cell phone tower telecommunication tower standards. Sorry, I got tongue-tied there. I wonder, Councillor Palat, if it might be more appropriate that we bring this, if this motion passes, to a strategic planning CCW, where we can work that out rather than do it in the public eye and have this discussion with our planners and other considerations too. I'm not saying we have to know the technology. I don't have a vote on this committee. I do support the motion and it's in how it's stated, and I think it was fairly clear. Like, let's at least look into this. So I just wonder if you might be open to amending your motion rather than bring it directly to council, but to a workshop sort of setting where we can have a good discussion about it.
Councillor Palat.
I'm open to what administration. That's why I asked our CEO what would be the best format. If it's coming back to the committee, if it's a CCW, I'm fine with that. I was more wanting to have admin take a little bit bigger swath on this. And just to speak to Councillor Bressie, like currently JP2 doesn't have a single house around it. So I guess they could apply for hundreds of towers on that site with no houses there yet. But then houses are going to show up at some point. At some point in the future, there will be residential around it. Right now, there isn't. So there's nobody to say no to that tower. But if JP2 just said, hey, we want to put up 100 towers because they want revenue, eventually there's going to be homeowners that are going to be probably too close to those, but they wouldn't even have had a chance to speak that. And that's my worry about schools in general, is schools aren't always just infilled in the middle of town. A lot of these probably would have residential setbacks that would step in. There are school districts that tend to like to build out in the area and build it and we will come. And so I'm worried about those schools. If we don't put a specific policy around schools and public use facilities, there's been schools built every 5 years in the city that, as long as back and I can remember, that didn't have residential around them at one point. And so I don't know how we'd put teeth around that unless we're putting it around all public schools. So that was my concern around that.
Before you go further, Mr. Johnson, can you respond to that before we lose that thought?
Thank you, Chair Blackmore. Just to give council some assurance that if the JP2 or John Paul High School scenario unfolded, our report to committee would clearly specify that the tower would be within 6 times the tower height of future residential properties. So we could base our decision, or committee could base your decision based on that. The only piece that would be missing from that versus an area that is existing development is that adjacent property owners wouldn't be notified because there are none. But I think it would be a valid planning consideration and to state that it would be immediately adjacent to residential. So I don't view that as a loophole in our regulations.
Okay.
CAO.
Just to expand on my previous advice, administration doesn't have a preference. We don't have advice of where this should go. If the motion is silent, it would come back to committee. If committee would like some other path, the options could be a CCW or directly to council. We'd want you to explicitly state that in the motion. I would say it would be helpful to administration if the scope was narrowed for us to bring for the discussion to occur, if that was at a CCW. If it is about setbacks in schools and public facilities, that would be something we could bring back to a CCW discussion or council, but we would ask you to identify that in the motion.
Okay.
Councillor Palat.
Thanks, Chair Blackmore. I guess then I would add that this comes back to a CCW.
Councillor Bressie.
So what's the intent of a CCW? Is it so that everybody can have a say and have a vote? Or what's the intent of CCW versus standing committee?
I guess for me, because it's coming to committee, and out of respect to council, I feel this could be a council conversation. I don't want to have it come to committee, we amend it, and we work on it as a committee, knowing there's members on council that would probably like to weigh in on this. So it's more of a respect to all of the colleagues that I think this is past just a committee level. Appreciate why it came to a committee level, but I think for me, this is a conversation that if I wasn't on this committee, I'd like to be part of, and I would like to extend that courtesy to all of our council.
Sure, which I guess goes into our next committee thing, where it's, for me, this just, we hit way more higher priority things that I think everybody wants to have a say on than this. So it's kind of a curious one for that. I guess for me, if you want me to support this motion, again, we need to narrow that. And a way that you could probably get my support is, because I'm open to everybody having a say and having further conversation. But for me, it's if the motion talked about what are you hoping to address? If we're going to ask administration to do a report, are you hoping to address health concerns? Are you hoping to address aesthetics? Are you hoping to address marketability? Just before we ask administration to do work to bring back a report, I'd like to say what we're actually hoping for them to address in that report.
And I guess for me, Councillor Bressie, I want to leave it vague enough. When our administration presented this, they looked at what setbacks were in other communities. They did talk about public use facilities being not really looked at in specific detail. I just would like administration to look at that in specific detail and come back with more information on it. It might come back and say every community is doing it this way, and that's fine. I don't know if I feel like from this report and the conversations we've had that we've got enough information to know what other communities are doing around this right now. So I don't want to broaden it too much either for them. And I want to trust administration that they're hearing the conversation, that they could go out and do a swath, and then we could show our community that, hey, we're already doubling the residential thing. Outside of that, we're also talking about public service in schools, and see what other communities are doing in those regards as well.
Mr. Johnson.
Through the chair, in the jurisdictional scan we did, as Zeal pointed out, of say 15 municipalities surveyed, maybe 2 or 3 had identified it as discouraged sites. That's the language they used. There weren't setbacks associated with it. So we could take a vague approach and say that they're discouraged locations, or we could just say something along the lines of, 6 times the tower height from residential areas, public use facilities, and schools. So there's a few different approaches. One would be just kind of a general policy direction. These are discouraged areas, or there'd be more of a hard and fast measurable sort of approach. But as far as other municipalities, it did not really pop up very much at all. There was, I think, 2.
So without wordsmithing today, and that's my worry is that we start wordsmithing today, is that I still would rather have a report come back, and if that's what administration says that we should change the wording to, then I'm fine with that, but I don't think we should be wordsmithing this today, in my opinion, but I'd like to see that come back, and if that's administration's recommendations, I'd be fine with those. I just would like to know we're doing a little bit bigger swath, and that we're going to have a conversation about that, not wordsmithing today.
I'm going to jump in the queue and ask administration, do you feel the motion is clear enough to give you direction, or do you have other questions you need answered before proceeding?
Thank you, through the chair. I guess it would be a challenge, because if it's administration recommending something at this point without clear direction, we would be recommending to maintain the status quo, because we're not really sure what the intentions are. However, we could bring back a report with options, just kind of summarizing like my last comment, saying options could include, you could say these are discouraged locations. Options include having some setback like we do have for residential. And along with that, we could outline some pros and cons to that approach. That's something we could do, but as far as an actual recommendation, at this point, it would be to maintain the status quo.
That may give us an indication of how we want to vote on this motion, but Councillor Palat, you had another point to raise?
Just in light of that, to give administration, and I guess us a little bit more of some goalposts on it, I would just like to add the word, when committee direct administration to work on consideration of what proposed setbacks could look like, and just put the word propose in there. I think that gives a little bit more direction for administration to come back and say we propose 0, we propose 50, we propose. Again, I'm not wanting to wordsmith it.
CAO Burke.
Just some clarification. Setbacks was one of the options, so maybe it would be just a little broader than that. I would turn to the director here for specific wording.
Yeah, I think options might be the better words. Yeah,
I would be happy for admin to make the wording work, that they get the intent of this. I'm not sure. Yeah.
We've kind of ground to a halt on this matter, so I think that that we do need to call a question and put it to bed one way or the other. The whole process is quite insidious in that as our technology changes and need for towers increase, we kind of incrementally grow forward with putting more and more towers up. And you think about your community, where you're going to put them, it's going to become a challenge. So I think that if putting cell towers near a site that is actively used by children or vast numbers of the public, if that's a concern for council, then this motion indeed needs to go forward. I see no other hands going up, so I'm going to call a question.
Councillor Plott in favor.
And that carries because there's 2 to 3, 2 against 1 for a total of 3. It's confusing when there's hardly anyone here. I'm not sure that sending it to Council Committee of the Whole is really a concern at this point, because I think our next committee meeting, we're going to change the structure of standing committees. So policy around standing committees, I don't know. We have no other, thanks, Joe. We have no other items of business other than the outstanding items list, so I would ask Chief McEachern to lead us through that.
Thank you, Chair Blackmore. For the outstanding items list, the only item I want to draw to attention is number 1304, the request for expression of interest, high-speed internet. We realize that there's a few details we still need to refine on this, including updating the expected report date, and I will have that available for our next committee meeting.
Thank you very much. Could we have a motion to accept this as amended? I don't know if it was amended. You make the motion, Councillor Bressie, as you see fit.
Thank you, Chair Blackmore. Just a comment I'll make on it for Chief McEachern. No motion coming out of it, but I've already had one proponent hoping for a sidewalk patio approach me and say, "Hey, we really need you guys to work on this policy and get it done quick because I want to apply for patio." So just want to let you know that, but it's Q1, so no need to change it. So happy to move that we accept as amended.
And I'll call a question.
Favor.
And that does carry. Before we adjourn the meeting, I'm going to ask Chief Glavin to comment.
Thank you, Chair Blackmore. I just wanted to address Councillor Bressie's inquiry on the patio program. That is the intent, but regardless of whether or not it is approved in time for patio season, we will ensure, based on past practice, that they get approved.
Thank you very much, and we will adjourn this meeting. The next meeting will start in probably about 3 minutes as we need to wrap things up today. Thanks.